How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm an avid herpetologist. I'm back from Nationals this last weekend, and it didn't go exactly as well as I might have hoped it did, but that's okay. So we wound up going 3-5-1, not the best record in the world, but considering this was my very first time competing at the national level, honestly, I am still just honored to have been able to have been a part of it. Congratulations to everybody, including the winner of the Nationals event. I actually had 2 people from my local group here in Tampa make it into the top 32. A big congrats to Raph and Sean. With that, I'm here to basically go over my own personal deck list. I know a lot of you have been asking about the Machinedramon list that I brought. No, sadly, I am not the Machinedramon player that went undefeated. Again, major props to you, whoever you were. I do apologize, I don't know your name, but feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to actually cover you, bring you on the channel, and go over your own deck list if this video somehow makes its way to you. With that being said, I do want to talk about my particular list. We're going to go over a quick deck profile showing you guys the specific list that I brought to Nationals. We're going to talk about all of my card choices, and then after the deck profile, if you guys are still interested in sticking around, I'm going to have a second part to this video where we're also going to talk about my experience from Nationals. We're going to talk about all of my matchups, the things that I found that worked really well, and the things that may have fallen flat for me personally. With all of that, we're going to go ahead and get into the deck profile. Hope you guys are ready. Let's get right to it. Alright, so starting our deck profile off, as always, we're going to be starting to talk about our eggs. For my particular list, we are still on black base, and we are still running 4 copies of BlackWargreymon. Now, BlackWargreymon is possibly the most replaceable egg I have ever had the misfortune of playing. However, this is still, in my opinion, the best go-to egg for black. I've seen some people already beginning to experiment with Doraemon, and more power to you. I hope it's been working out for you. I will be switching over to Doraemon as of BT12 when we get Chaosdramon X, just because Chaosdramon X gives a more reliable and recurring way to trigger the effect. That goes for Doraemon and Garurumon, who I actually also plan on at least trying out in the list. But for now, Pagumon, in my opinion, is the best generic black egg that we have. Not a whole lot, unfortunately. It's not a very high bar to meet, but Pagumon at 4 copies is what we have been using in our black slot. At the very least, it does often come up as an extra form of card advantage on death, so there is at least that, but this card still whiffs frustratingly often. But we are going to go ahead and start moving into our rookies. Now, the rookies, of course, we are still going to be playing our 4 copies of Agurumon. This is easily one of the most important staples in the entire deck. Not only is this a way to build onto our eggs, but the ability to discard our cyborgs and draw 2 cards for extra card advantage is still vital for this deck's game plan. So we are still playing 4 copies of Agurumon. Now, the only other 4 black rookies that I'm playing is actually 4 copies of Security Chikorimon. Now, this is a tech option I started running near the end of BT10/EX3, and I honestly really like this card. I don't necessarily know that it's going to stay in. Like I said, I do plan on adding some Dorumons once we hit BT12, but for the time being, this card is an absolute bomb if you do happen to hit it in Security. So for those of you unaware, this Chikorimon is 3 to play, 1000 DP, 0 to Digivolve, of course. Has a security effect where if it's checked in the security, after the battle, you can trigger a D-Digivolve 1 on one of your opponent's Digimon. This is absolutely crucial if you are playing against certain strategies such as Grandis, MetalGarurumon X, and some other regressive strategies such as Crossheart. This is a phenomenal card where if they check it in security, you can potentially end their game-winning play on the spot. If a multi-swinging Grandis happens to hit this, the unsuspend effect is end of attack. So by running into this, you will prevent them from unsuspending it, but could potentially end their entire combo turn on the spot. Very similar deals with MetalGarurumon X and other decks, again, like Crossheart, where you can take off the very powerful top end and have very fragile and exposed layers underneath. Chikorimon, I don't really mind just slapping onto an egg. That's really, if we're building up in the raising area, our rookies don't really need to do a whole lot. They're basically just there to bridge up into our higher levels of the stack. So Chikorimon is basically just an extra security threat that I can use to make kind of more of a controlling shell here. I have seen plenty of success with this Chikorimon, and for the rest of BT11, I will absolutely continue running it. The other rookie we are running is actually 3 copies of Sistermon Blanc from the structure deck Jesmon. Now, this is a pretty new addition, and I've kind of been up and down on this card, but I want to make sure I explain pretty well why we are playing Sistermon in this particular list. You see, in this new format, we are definitely playing a much more control, mid-rangey, grindy format. In EX3 and BT10 and 9, we were dealing with a lot of OTK strategies. And to be fair, we are still dealing with plenty of OTKs. As I mentioned, Melga and Grandis are still running around. but we're also dealing with some of the top decks in the format being BlackWargreymon X. That is really, I mean, the top deck in the format. In order to play well against BlackWargreymon X, you need to have a fundamental shift in how you are playing the matchup. I'll talk a little bit more about my BlackWargreymon matchups once we get to that section of the video. But suffice it to say that one of the most important strategies you need against that deck is the ability to build up in raising while still progressing your game plan on the board without having to commit too much. So ideally I want to be building a stack in my raising area while still being able to trash things from my hand, load my yard up, and get ready for my big Chaosdramon play in a couple of turns. Sistermon Blanc being extra copies of the Hagurumon in fact, technically even better in some cases where she can pitch any unneeded cards in my hand, makes her an incredibly useful tool for this deck to use. Being able to play her on turn 1 or turn 2 where I can just, again, cycle through a bunch of additional cards, it's proved itself to be very valuable. I'm definitely enjoying playing her at 3. It's kind of an awkward number, but I've found that it's just about right. I do like her at 3 copies, but those are going to be the only 8 eggs that we can use, or 8 rookies we can use to digivolve onto our egg. And then we also have our Sistermon Blancs, which we can then slap down and get some extra jigging as well. Moving up into our champions, we are playing a total of 7. We are playing 2 copies of Tankmon. Tankmon is 6 to play, 6000 DP, only 1 to digivolve, and has no effects. This is a cyborg, so it is going to have the cyborg rookie or the cyborg machine synergies with cards like Gurumon and Gardramon, and it is 1 to digivolve, so it's able to bridge the gap between our rookies and our ultimates super well, while also having a 6000 DP body, which is surprisingly aggressive. There were actually plenty of times during my matchups at Nationals where being able to go for 1 and swing over a body just to clear it off the board did absolutely come in handy. Tankmon is a really solid card. I don't necessarily know. Honestly, I might consider running up into 4 copies, not 4 copies, maybe 3 copies, but this card is honestly a bit of an overperformer. It doesn't look like it does a whole lot, but its utility really can't be overstated. It is a very, very good card. Next is, of course, the bread and butter. This is going to be 4 copies of EX1 Gardramon. This is going to be the main 4 of, you'll see most Machinedramon lists that are stack building run. This Gardramon's Inheritable is, again, one of the best sources of card advantage the deck has access to, where every time you swing, you can churn through more of your deck. Having all of these different discard 1 and draw 2 effects lets you see a lot of your deck very, very quickly. It's honestly a super powerful play. This is definitely going to be my ideal turn 1 or 2. Being able to digivolve a rookie and then pass 2 with Gardramon is my go-to if I'm able to do that, but Tankmon is a great alternative. And the last champion we are playing a single copy of Machinedramon. Now, I've been playing 1 copy just because I think Machinedramon isn't necessarily as good this format as he's been in previous formats. If you think about all of the decks that I've mentioned up until this point, he really doesn't do a whole lot against. However, there are still decks out there that have a very hard time getting through a resolved Machinedramon. Think things like Commandramon, things like Crossheart. These are decks that are going to struggle if you are able to stick an early Machinedramon and they don't have the answer to it. So I do think Machinedramon in the matchups where it's good is still very good. However, I do think this may be one of my quickest cuts now that Nationals is over with. I think I'll probably cut Machinedramon, probably for a 3rd copy of Tankmon, but for now I have been playing that single copy of Machinedramon. His cheaper play cost does come in handy from time to time, so that has been my champion suit. It actually worked out fairly well. Honestly, this is usually the cloggiest part of most Machinedramon lists, but in the games that I was playing at Nationals, there really were only, I think, 1 or 2 games over the course of the full 9 rounds that we played, best of 3, where I really felt like I was lacking on the lower end. This shell actually performed surprisingly well. I'm playing a lot of consistency pieces in the form of, again, extra copies of Sistermon. I've got some memory boosts in here. All of that extra consistency searching really did a number on helping smooth out my lines, so I've honestly, this particular group of 7, I did find a lot of success with, but this is probably one of the first places I'll think about making tweaks if I decide to do so. Now we are going to move up into our ultimate lineup. This is, of course, always going to be the most diverse and interesting part of any Machinedramon deck list, because this is where the spicy techs come in. Not a whole lot of super interesting things to talk about, but we will go over ratios, and I'll discuss things that I thought really worked well and things that may not have. To begin with, we do have our 1 new copy of BT11 MetalGarurumon. So this Tyrannomon has a when digivolving effect. For each green or black tamer in play, you can suspend 1 of your opponent's Digimon and then keep 1 of your opponent's Digimon from unsuspending on the next turn. Now, a lot of the decks right now, again, referring back to BlackWargreymon X, and even decks like MetalGarurumon, they're probably not going to leave their big threat in place suspended. So even though this has the ability to immediately digivolve and keep a big threat suspended, that's not going to come up super duper often because a lot of the big ones do unsuspend themselves in some way or another. But if you do happen to have an analog man in play, the only tamer I am currently running, you will be able to suspend them down and then keep them there. And then, of course, the big reason people play this MetalTyrannomon is the inheritable. On all turns, both turns, once per turn, when this Digimon deletes an opponent's Digimon in battle, trash the top card of your opponent's security stack. So one of the big things this card was really heralded was as ideally a good way to help this deck deal with decks like Security Control with a lot of big security threats. And I mean, for me personally, unfortunately, that matchup is still an uncrackable nut. I did face Security Control twice at Nationals. Neither of those matchups went well. It honestly still feels just like you're banging your head into a brick wall. It is an incredibly frustrating matchup to play. But the inheritable here is still incredibly powerful and does still put in serious work against pretty much every deck in the format. Having that extra source of trashing, not only on your own turn by deleting Digimon by swinging over them, but also on the opponent's turn if you happen to block something, really does make your opponent think extra hard about having to swing in and try to get some chip damage if you have an early Chaosdramon in play. So MetalTyrannomon is a very powerful card. I have considered bumping it up to 2. I do think this card is probably fine at 1 copy though. But we're going to go ahead and move on to our next one. I am actually back to playing a single copy of Gigadramon from BT6. Now this Gigadramon's effect is while in play on the opponent's turn, this Digimon gets plus 2k DP. That is the inheritable. So for a very long time, in fact, not since BT8, this card has not made my lists when I'm playing Machinedramon. A big reason for that is after BT9, when we received Attack of the Heavy Mobile Digimon and the better play became just blitzing in Machinedramon, Gigadramon's inheritable really doesn't do anything with that particular play. Since this is an inheritable meant to beef up your board on the opponent's turn, I didn't see a lot of merit to running Gigadramon in those more aggressive kind of push forward lists. However, now that we have Analog Man is able to redirect attacks to your level 6 machines in addition to giving blocker. So basically you're able to get more mileage out of being defensive. So basically I think one of the big thresholds we need in this current format is being able to get above 13k. Some of the big decks, including BlackWargreymon, barring outside inheritables, think about Mastemon, Hydramon. There are lots of decks in the format right now that have a base stat total of 13,000. Both Machinedramon and Chaosdramon can reach or exceed 13,000 with this extra 2k buff. If you are looking to build even a slightly more defensive list, and if you are including Analog Man, in general, I do highly recommend trying out copies of Gigadramon again, making your one beefy body, or multiple if you're lucky enough, that much more unstoppable bulwark of a wall to get through. It is incredibly powerful. This card has definitely kind of earned its spot back on the list. Its plays with Analog Man are definitely worth considering, so I am playing one copy of that Gigadramon. And we are also playing a copy of the new Gigadramon from BT11. Now this Gigadramon has inherent jamming, so while it is in play, if it attacks into the opponent's security, you will not lose any security checks. So you will automatically beat any Digimon that you check. It cannot die to those battles, which basically lets you get free triggers on your Guardramon inheritable. So if you digivolve this Gigadramon onto that Guardramon, you are then able to get some free discard 1, draw 2 procs, which is always going to be super helpful, especially on the early turns. Ideally, I want to be able to go into this guy either the turn before I'm able to attack, or while still in raising, or be able to push up, digivolve into this, and swing immediately. We've definitely learned a lesson in this format where if we are playing a stack building list, you need to be very careful if you are not able to get immediate value off of your stack. If you are going to be pushing up out of the raising, you need to make sure one of two things is true. Either you can get immediate value and you are okay with your stack dying, or you are going to be protected because you can digivolve into this and then put Chaosdramon on top without having to worry about, again, it getting deleted instantly. We need to make sure we are being a little more conservative with protecting our stacks. Knowing when to push up and when to hold back is one of the big gatekeepers to playing stack build Machinedramon right now. So I'll talk again a little bit more about that as we get into my matchup analysis later on in the video. Now, next we are going to be playing 2 copies of EX1 Andromon. We're going to go ahead and get right into all 3 of our general 3 go-to cyborgs. We have 3 Andromon with the reboot inheritable, with the blocker inheritable, 3 MetalTyrannomon with the 2 MetalTyrannomon, goodness me, with the reboot inheritable, And we have a single copy of MetalGarurumon with the on attacking, delete one of your opponent's Digimon, play cost 5 or less inheritable. Now these are still the 3 best setup cards this deck has access to, and is one of the best follow-up plays as well. If I have an initial Chaosdramon in play and I'm looking to follow up that with more aggression, being able to Digivolve this next to that Chaosdramon is a very good play as well, because it'll help you find additional copies of Chaosdramon or Machinedramon depending on how you want to go about your plays. So basically on Digivolve, all 3 of these have the identical effect to check the top 3 cards of your deck. You can add any level 6 machine with from among them to your hand, and then you trash the rest. So ideally, you're going to check a couple Cyborgs to send to the trash. You'll check a Chaosdramon or a Machinedramon, which can then add to your hand. But these cards are still absolutely invaluable for the deck. They are still super phenomenal. One of my best, most important cards that I would love to see in my opening hand, just to make sure I can get a little bit of extra setup before moving on into Chaosdramon. Honestly, if I was going to make some adjustments again, not only would I change my champion lineup, I actually would add another copy of MetalGarurumon. One of the big things I noticed is that I was hoping to see MetalGarurumon more often than I expected, especially when you were able to go into Chaosdramon without passing turn. MetalGarurumon is a fantastic inheritable. A lot of the decks that you're going to be triple de-digivolving, again, all of the big names, including MetalGarurumon X, Grandis, and the big bad BlackWargreymon X itself, more often than not, triple de-digivolving will send them back to a champion level, which will get popped by MetalGarurumon. So if you're able to Digivolve into Chaosdramon, reset their stack down to champion, and then swing, you don't have to waste the swing on the stack. You can swing at their security and still pop the body, which is very valuable aggression. It's like an extra copy of BT8 MetalGarurumon to be able to attack an unsuspended Digimon while also having piercing, all kind of at the same time. So I actually do want to add an extra copy of this card. I don't know if I'm going to cut a Cyborg or maybe just raise up my Cyborg count. I'm also thinking about adding another copy of Analog Man, so maybe I do just raise my Cyborg count up by 1, just to make sure I've got a little bit extra cycling to do with those Analog Men, but yeah, at the Nationals, I did play MetalGarurumon at 1, but I honestly regretted it. I do wish I had been playing 2. Next, we are still playing our 2 copies of MetalGarurumon, of course, from BT8. As I just mentioned, this is still one of the best inheritables in the entire deck, giving you the ability to attack unsuspended Digimon as long as you are a machine. And the when Digivolving effect is still just as valuable as ever before. When Digivolving, de-Digivolve one of your opponent's Digimon, and pop one of their Digimon to play with 3,000 DP or less. So this MetalGarurumon is still one of the best Cyborgs. Again, there are certain ones that you really want to be seeing and Digivolving onto your stack. This MetalGarurumon is absolutely one of them. It is very, very powerful. We are going to also be playing our single copy of Volcanomon from Structure Deck. I think this was from Structure Deck Ragnalord. It was from Ragnalord or Jess. I think this one might have been Jessmon. But Volcanomon is a blocker inherently, so it is an 8 to play, 4 to Digivolve, 9,000 DP blocker, which comes up every once in a while. And also has a generic security +1 inheritable, which lets you push extra aggression. Speaking of which, we are also still playing a single copy of EX1 Machinedramon, which shares that security +1 inheritable. Although instead of being generic, the top card does have to be a machine. So if they did Digivolve you, you will no longer have that security +1 if you are not still a machine. So just bear that in mind. It does also have a very still relevant on-play effect where it can delete up to 2 of your opponent's Digimon with 3,000 DP or less. This effect comes up surprisingly often. It is great for board clear and staging off just that one extra body you might need to stay alive for a turn. We are still playing a single copy of Machinedramon from BT6. That plus 2,000 DP inheritable does come up, and right alongside it we are also playing our secret rare MetalGarurumon from BT1 or BT2, yeah, BT1, that still has that generic plus 3,000 inheritable. This card, both of these are still vitally necessary. There's going to be a lot of situations where you need to swing over tall stacks. Again, BlackWargreymon is one of the best examples, and being able to get over their 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 DP caps is extremely important. So make sure you are packing at least 2 DP buffs minimum. And I am also playing, as my last Cyborg, a single copy of MetalGarurumon from EX1. Having that piercing inheritable is super helpful. There again are going to be times where you need to control the board while pushing aggression at the same time to make sure your opponent is on a clock. It doesn't always feel valuable, and I will admit I, more so than a lot of other big Machinedramon players, have kind of overlooked this card's value in the past. But having piercing really is more valuable than it looks. Being able to, again, control board state while also pushing aggression and forcing your opponent to answer your board state faster, it is important. There's even, honestly, some merit to me even running a second copy of this, but I personally do plan on just keeping this card at a single copy. It does also have a when attacking effect, where if this Digimon swings into the opponent's security, attacks a player, you can destroy something in play 4,000 DP or less, so there's some spot removal on it as well. Alright, next we are moving up, of course, into our level 6s. First of all, we are playing 3 copies of EX1 Machinedramon, the namesake of the deck. Now, this is still a very powerful card. I think it's actually a little bit better now than it was last format, again, because OTK decks are a little less frequent than they used to be. But this card actually serves another very important use that I've been overlooking and did serve me extremely well, again, specifically in a lot of my black matchups at Nationals. Being able to build a stack in Raising and put Machinedramon on top of it before we move into Chaosdramon is very important and extremely good for a lot of reasons. First of all, you're basically banking that 3 memory that you don't have to use. Being able to put out Chaosdramon for 4 memory and not pass the turn takes a lot of setup. But playing Machinedramon and being willing to pass the turn for 3 memory obviously frees up your ability to make plays on the following turn as long as you can afford it. And since we are not dealing with as many OTK strategies, being able to build up to Machinedramon in the stack and be able to Digivolve on top of it for a single memory with Chaosdramon, it is a very powerful play right now, and I think it's not to be undervalued. That exact line actually saved me in quite a few of my games while I was at Nationals. It's a very, very good thing to do. So if you are looking on surprising your opponent, if you're looking for playing that game of chicken that I've mentioned in past games where you are daring your opponent to raise before you, Digivolving Machinedramon onto a stack and raising is a very threatening play, and it basically is going to force your opponent to play around Chaosdramon for a single memory on the following turn, which, let's face it, is very difficult to do. Speaking of which, we are going to still be playing our 4 copies of Chaosdramon from EX3. This Chaosdramon is still, in my opinion, the best card to be building around in Machinedramon strategies right now. Now, I am not playing any copies of BT11 Machinedramon. I'm still not super high on the card. Yes, I know that milling 5 cards is very powerful. It definitely is. But in order to get that mill 5, number 1, you have to be in the raising area. Number 2, you have to expose your stack to potential disruption, and I'm still not super high on that effect. Now, as always, I'm going to say, like I always do, yes, when you're able to get your BT11 Machinedramon destroyed, and you have an Analog Man in play, and the EX1 Machinedramon in hand, there's a very high ceiling there, but that is a lot of setup. The problem is, you need to be able to set up your plays in a way that is not super easy to interrupt. There are plenty of ways to deal with BT11 Machinedramon that do not involve destruction, including de-digivolving, bouncing, and tugging into your deck. Plenty of decks do this, including Hydramon, MetalGarurumon X, and the big bad BlackWargreymon X, which is able to de-digivolve recurringly, like over and over and over. They have a lot of de-digivolve effects. Now, even though your stack may be safe to Hades Force, it's not going to be safe to BT8 MetalGarurumon triggers, Gaiamon triggers, etc., etc. So I do think BT11 Machinedramon is unfortunately a bit too easy to play around. So my personal list, I am playing 3 Machinedramon, and I am still playing my 4 copies of Chaosdramon. Chaosdramon, being able to raise it up and immediately punish your opponent, again, I've said it before, I think if you are able to get yourself in a situation where you are at 4 memory and can Digivolve into Chaos without passing turn, the damage you are going to do to your opponent's board state on that turn is very difficult to describe. There is going to be so much recovery that your opponent has to work through after that play that I really, again, I'm going to continue preaching the gospel here. I think Chaosdramon is absolutely worth being the centerpiece of the deck. However, using Machinedramon as the proper setup for Chaosdramon is, again, a skill that I think is going to take some time, even for myself, to learn how to do properly. I think there's still a lot of potential there for kind of expanding and learning how to do different plays, but this deck is still, the way that it is still incredibly fun because of these 2 monsters. Now, we are, as I mentioned, playing 2 Tamers. We are playing our 2 copies of Analog Man. Now, Analog Man, I wouldn't even say has necessarily surprised me, but this card is definitely better than I had originally given it credit for. This does give us the ability to make our level 6 stacks significantly more threatening, and it makes your opponent have to play around them way more than they normally would. They're not just going to be able to send a rookie in to die to your aggression and then just let the rest of the team go in. You're actually going to have to play around multiple blocks, basically, which is very frustrating sometimes for the opponent. Now, the setup on the start of the turn. Do I still think Analog Man should have been a memory setter? Yes. Do I still wish that Analog Man would let you drop any machine or cyborg to gain your memory and draw your card? Yes. However, I will say that trashing the level 5 Cyborg to gain a memory draw card is still a much more valuable effect than I was expecting. It is still kind of difficult, and there were still plenty of turns where I wish I had had more Cyborgs to pitch to this card. As I mentioned, I may consider adding a third copy and adding another copy of MetalGarurumon to kind of increase my ability to see that particular line. But in general, I will say that Analog Man is a much better card than I gave it credit for. I'm actually playing Gigadramon specifically to take advantage of Analog Man. So yeah, this is a card I think I would probably rather have seen more copies of while I was at Nationals. Just please make sure that, again, when you're playing this card, it's important to remember you don't have to trash a Cyborg every turn if you don't want to. Especially if you're going to be passing your opponent an awkward amount of memory, hold back your Cyborg. Don't drop it if you don't need to. Save it for a future turn when that memory is going to be a lot more valuable. I do think Analog Man is a phenomenal card, but you really need to make sure you're playing to its strengths and make sure you are playing around its play patterns if you really want it to do what you need it to do. Next up, we are going to be playing 3 copies of Black Memory Boost. Now, Black Memory Boost is a tech card that I actually got from somebody at my locals, and this card has been phenomenal for me so far. This is great at helping to unbrick cloggy hands. Analog Man, of course, does the same thing, but it also helps you get to that memory threshold where you have 4 memory to digivolve into Chaosdramon on the following turn. I've already talked at length about why that's so valuable, but it really can't be understated. Black Memory Boost can add pretty much anything you need. The only things it really can't hit are Systemon Blanc, Megadramon, and these 3. Your 2 copies of MetalGarurumon and your other copy of Megadramon. So I'm playing 3 copies of Black Memory Boost. I would potentially consider taking one of these out, but if I was to do that, it would require something very specific, I think. I think this card is just too good not to be playing at 3. If I'm going to be playing 2, the card that I need to bring in for that slot also needs to be a consistency piece, because checking 4 and adding whatever Digimon I want is just, it's so powerful. I definitely enjoyed using this card, and it did a lot of work for me. We are now also back on playing 3 copies of Attack of the Heavy Mobile Digimon. As I previously mentioned, I don't want to think this is a contradiction. I recognize, of course, that Gigadramon does not do anything with this card in particular, blitzing it in. However, Attack of the Heavy Mobile Digimon and blitzing back into Machinedramon to follow up a powerful answer to your board state is still a very good responsive play. I don't know if I would still want 3 of this card. This is another one I would consider cutting a copy of, just because this is still very much a dedicated stack building list. I could absolutely see cutting a copy of Attack of the Heavy Mobile, just to try to smooth out my plays in other areas of the deck. But when you're able to blitz for game, obviously that is a huge game-winning move. Being able to clear out your opponent's security and have an attacker that your opponent can't really interact with hiding in your hand, it's very, very good. Hybrid for game has become a meme in the Digimon community, but it's a meme for a reason. It's a very powerful play, and this is Machinedramon's version of Hybrid for game. So definitely need to be playing Attack of the Heavy Mobile Digimon at least minimum 2 copies. Lastly, we are going to be playing 2 copies of Ultimate Connection. Now, Ultimate Connection, again, is a card I've been very lukewarm on. This card is good when it's good, and it's bad when it's bad. There were times at Nationals where this got checked in security, and I didn't have the Cyborg in hand, and it just kind of did nothing. There were also more than one game, I think 2 games actually, where my opponent hit this in security, and it actually passed the turn and forced them out of a play pattern that they thought they were going to win through, and ultimately I was able to win or wipe their board on the following turn. So being able to pass unexpectedly is a very big deal. This is a card I could maybe even see adding in copies of, like a Memory Setter Tamer, maybe in that slot. Instead, I'm again, honestly not 100% sure. I will say, though, Analog Man and Ultimate Connection fighting for having your Cyborgs in the hand can feel a little taxing at times, needing to hold all of those Cyborgs up when you'd rather just be turboing them down into your trash with Sistermons and Mahagurumons. But, so there's a couple of things that I definitely would consider tweaking with this list. However, this is an incredibly solid and robust list. I did feel very confident, even in a lot of the games that I lost outside of my 2 rounds against Security Control, which is a different beast entirely. Even the rounds that I lost were honestly very close in a lot of circumstances. In fact, the tie round that my opponent unfortunately decided to take our first turn in time all the way to the end of the time limit, but had he passed his turn, I actually had the win. He and I discussed and played out the rest of the game once we had concluded that the game was going to be a tie. I did have the win on my next turn. Unfortunately, he did, I don't want to accuse him of slow playing, but again, we were still on the very first term of time when we finally did pass, and I did actually have victory, so that was one win that could have been considered an extra win. I also misplayed in my very last round against a good friend of mine, my MetalGarurumon friend, where I had a game during our game 3, but I forgot to activate my analog trigger, which cut me a little slack. This was my first big tournament. This was round 9. I was exhausted. But if I'd had that one extra memory off of the Analog Man, I did have the win in that final round as well. So potentially could have been a 5-4 record, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it was a 3-5-1 record. But just for the record, if you are discouraged or are hearing that win-loss record or thinking to yourself, this is not a super great list, I would say try it out for yourself. If you're looking into building a stack building Machinedramon list, this list did perform very consistently and very solidly. It has a very good, well-rounded matchup against a lot of the big names in the meta. So if you are looking for a good way to kind of get your feet wet and you want to play something that is Machinedramon stack build, this is a good place to start. So I would highly recommend checking it out. Anyways, that's going to about do it for the deck list. We are going to go ahead and move on. I'm going to go ahead and start the next section of the video, which is going to be talking a little bit about my experiences at Nationals, talk a little bit about the decks that I went up against, and things that I thought worked really well and things that did not. All right, with the deck list out of the way, guys, we're going to start talking a little bit about my experiences at Nationals, including my specific matchups that I went up against, how I felt those matchups went, and advice and suggestions and things that I noticed could have been better in those particular matchups. To begin with, I did play in 2 different rounds against the boogeyman of the format, BlackWargreymon X, and I am very proud to inform everybody that I did go 2-0 against BlackWargreymon X in both of those games. Not maybe almost had the win, like they were pretty surprisingly clean 2-0s. My opponents were not bricking. They both played very well. They were incredible players, but I was able to pull them out, and a big reason that I was able to pull those games out is a couple of small strategies that I've talked a little bit about on the channel that I'm going to go a little bit more into to help with that particular matchup. The biggest thing that works to help Machinedramon, at least stack building Machinedramon, win that particular matchup is the ability to hold back in your raising area. All of the games that I played against BlackWargreymon X at Nationals, I did the same strategy. I've already talked about it. We build a stack in raising where we go from rookie, champion, ultimate, potentially into Machinedramon if I am able to do that, and hide there. We keep that stack where it is, and we try to make as many plays as we can out in the play area while leaving that stack back. Basically, what you want to do is hold back as long as you can and force your opponent to raise first. If you push your stack forward, it doesn't matter if you've gone into Chaosdramon, it doesn't matter if you just have an ultimate stack. If you push forward first, you are going to get punished in this matchup. In order to play well against BlackWargreymon X, you have to learn proper patience. This is actually a skill that I will say I was very good at performing, and it definitely paid off in the long run and brought home the wins against that particular deck. The other big strategy that did really work well is putting Machinedramon on top of the stack instead of waiting and just immediately going into Chaosdramon. This is mostly for D-Digivolve protection. When you get D-Digivolve from Chaosdramon, if you do not have Machinedramon in the stack, you are getting set to an ultimate, which is going to take away pretty much every benefit that that stack had. Most of the inheritables, specifically the level 5 inheritables that you need to hold on to, are specifically applied to a level 6 machine on top unless you are playing Structure Deck Megadramon. I'm not playing that Megadramon anymore just because I'm already playing 2 Andramon and I want that on Digivolve effect. Analog Man is going to help cover the extra blocker bodies. So that's the big reason I'm not running the generic blocker effect. However, since we are not running that blocker effect, again, we want to make sure that if we do get de-digivolved, we are not losing all of our advantage. Analog Man can no longer redirect to that stack if it goes below level 6. So digivolving Machinedramon onto the stack, first of all, it's going to save you memory, so you can only have to digivolve into Chaosdramon for 1 when it comes time to respond to what your opponent's doing. But the other side of it again is, if they choose to digivolve your stack and you lose your Chaosdramon, you still have a very serviceable Machinedramon underneath, and in fact, if they can't remove that Machinedramon after de-digivolving, then you can go into a second Chaosdramon on the next turn and tuck another 3 inheritables and de-digivolve again. It is incredibly powerful, and it is very, very difficult for BlackWargreymon to get over a stack that has Machinedramon under Chaosdramon. So don't be afraid, even though there's no immediate value to putting Machinedramon onto a stack, consider doing it more frequently when you are playing in your raising area. Put Machinedramon out there first and wait to go into Chaosdramon for when you push up. It's going to let you be a lot more flexible and a lot more aggressive because you're much more memory efficient on your aggro turn while you're waiting to do everything here. Along those same lines, a lot of the card choices that I've already talked about in the deck profile, things like the Memory Boosts, Analog Mans, and Sistermons, were phenomenal at helping me set up my Chaosdramon stack without having to actually push forward. I do love my EX1 Cyborg Digivolution triggers where you can check 3 and trash them. It's a great effect, but we sometimes just need to stand raising and just let that trigger just not go off. Sometimes you're better off just playing it safe, hiding and raising, and using these other options to kind of dig out the pieces that you need and get your play set up. Being able to make plays out in the play area while your raising area is still being threatening is really, really cool, and it's very, very powerful. It's a very different strategy than what I've kind of been used to playing in Machinedramon. I'm used to kind of pushing forward and getting aggression as quickly as I can, but again, patience is key to this format. So for BlackWargreymon specifically, and a lot of these other more grindy control decks, be willing to hide in your raising area. Unless you are playing an OTK strategy where you have to push aggression super early or get a big blocker in play, specifically against things like Grandis and Melga, be willing to hide in raising as long as you possibly can so you are able to punish your opponent hardest when they make the play before you. So that's going to about do it for the BlackWargreymon X matchups. Now my round 2 was actually against a very skilled Blue Flare player. Now I went to game 3 against Blue Flare. Unfortunately, I did wind up losing game 3, but we're going to talk about why I lost game 3 because it's honestly a little bit frustrating. So game 1 against Blue Flare, I honestly did not play super well. Unfortunately, I did commit too many bodies to the board too quickly. They were able to get freezing effects in there. I actually had like 6 bodies in play all at once. I had like multiple Hagurus, multiple Sisters, and 2 Chaosdramons. But the problem with Blue Flare is if you commit too many bodies too fast and they are able to get some of their early freeze effects off of things like MetalGarurumon and MetalBurgermon's Inheritable, you won't be able to do anything with that board state. Go as wide as you want. Most of the time, they're still going to be able to just freeze you in your tracks and just tell you no. You have to hold back bodies and try to keep one in play as long as you can, or they are going to punish you again for it. Being able to learn, again, I mentioned it in my 6 tips for Machinedramon video, you really have to learn to adjust your playstyle to go around different archetypes, and Blue Flare is definitely one that has honestly been a very strong matchup for me in the past, but I definitely didn't play game 1 super well. Game 2 was a lot different. I learned from my mistake first round. We played a lot better where we had a single Chaosdramon in play, and they simply couldn't handle it. A single Chaosdramon, especially with Analog Man backup, is very difficult for Blue Flare to get through because they're going to be able to they got to trade bodies with you, and they can't freeze you super consistently. The MetalGarurumon on play is really going to be their primary way to do it, or MetalBurgermon, and both of those require there to be at least 2 bodies in play or they can't freeze you, period. And if they can't freeze you, then there's nothing to stop them from punishing you on the following turn. So as long as you can play around that, the matchup is actually not too challenging. Now, game 3. Game 3 is where things kind of went a little bit off the rails. I had one of the best setups I think I've ever had in this particular matchup before. On turn 2 or 3, we had set up a Chaosdramon, a single body in play. It had blocker reboot, it had an extra check, and it had piercing. His board was pretty much wide open aside from I think like a MetalBurgermon, and I had done 3 security checks. So he had already been knocked down to 2 security. I had an Analog Man in play, so blocker reboot plus an Analog Man. I had a body sitting and raising ready to promote, and I had the blitz option with a Machinedramon in hand ready to blitz in for game. Like, we were set, right? This is a setup where I really couldn't paint a better picture in a Blue Flare matchup. Here's the problem. First thing he did was digivolve onto the MetalBurgermon a BlackWargreymon. BlackWargreymon is really the only card in the deck that can freeze a single body on its own while it's in play. So he comes in with the BlackWargreymon, freezes the MetalBurgermon, and gets a quick check-in. I think by the last turn I was down to 3 security. I don't remember when his security checks went through. It may have been before this turn, but he was able to get me down to 3 security, which will come in and play later. So he BlackWargreymons and freezes my Chaosdramon. Now, I've heard a couple people say it may be a good idea at this point to just go ahead and push forward and try to push some aggression. But again, the problem is if you do that and you're not able to end the game, and they're able to drop the MetalGarurumon, they're going to punish you. If you're not able to end the game on the spot, it can be very risky to put a second body on board. So I opted to keep the body in raising, keep the Chaosdramon out, and basically force them to continue having to try to play around this big bulwark body with the Analog Man extra block. It was a very powerful destructive wall, also a very powerful nuclear warhead. So the thought process is, Chaosdramon, all it needs to do is get 1 more check and we're golden, right? We check 2 more security. If it's ever unfrozen and it's able to swing in, which should be able to, all it takes is on that turn where it's able, push the body forward, swing in with Chaosdramon, get the checks. If it happens to lose one of its inheritables, fine. Swing with my body from raising, and then we blitz option for game. So there's a very good setup here. So he passes to me. I play a memory boost, pass it back to him. What does he do? He drops another BlackWargreymon. BlackWargreymon goes on top of the old BlackWargreymon and freezes Chaosdramon a second time. Very unfortunate, but okay. Switches back to me. I Digivolve another body onto my raising area. I went, I think, from a rookie up to Garurumon, up to like an Andromon or something like that, and basically just passed it back. I was like, cool, all right, we're good. We still got another turn. We're fine. What does he do? He plays a third BlackWargreymon. The third copy that comes down freezes my Chaosdramon for the third turn in a row, and ultimately what he does in that turn is swing with all three of his bodies. The problem is he is now at 3 memory and has enough bodies from the previous turns that he can check all 3 of my security. Well, Kyle, why didn't you just redirect those attacks? Here's the thing. If I was to redirect the attacks, for those of you who have played against Blue Ferret know what's going to happen in this situation. He has 3 bodies, 3 memory, and I have 3 security. If I redirect one of those bodies to my Chaosdramon, MetalGarurumon comes down and the game ends. I have to keep my Chaosdramon up to stop the MetalGarurumon or the game is over. So I have to let all 3 of the bodies through. Gaussmon goes through, Male Birdramon I think goes through, and then the BlackWargreymon goes through. I can't deal with it, unfortunately. And because when the turn passes back to me, he has another body on board. He winds up playing a Madoki Betamon. It passes back to me. My Machinedramon, or my Chaosdramon is still sitting there, still can't attack or block. I still don't have a way to deal with his final 2 security. I can still do 2 checks, but I still don't have a way to push for game, so ultimately the game winds up going to him. Had he not had 3 copies of specifically BlackWargreymon, that game would have been a phenomenal blowout. But again, there's going to be times where there's nothing you can do. You can play as well as you want to, but if your opponent has the outs, then your opponent has the outs. There's nothing you can do about that. So I really don't feel bad about losing that round. Again, we both played a very phenomenal game. He had the outs, and that is completely fair. He was an excellent opponent. I have nothing but respect for him. So well done on taking me to the cleaners there. But yeah, I really wish you hadn't pulled all 3 copies of BlackWargreymon. That was really unfortunate for me. So my next matchup that we had at Nationals was against Crossheart. Crossheart is another deck that I've historically done pretty well against in general with Machinedramon. Machinedramon does have a relatively good matchup against Crossheart just because, again, Crossheart has a very hard time dealing with very large body blockers. So if you can set up a very early Chaosdramon or Machinedramon, they're probably not going to be able to deal with it super well. Especially without super easy deletion effects. Their really only deletion effects are going to be like DP reduction, which they have to hit very specific cards if they want to deal with Chaosdramon, and in the case of Machinedramon, they can't deal with that anyways because you can't reduce its DP. So those stacks are very difficult for Chaosdramon to actually deal with. So, you know, there's that. So the first game he took, he aggressed me super quick. He had, I think, like 6 or 7 tamers in play on turn 3. He had all of the pieces he needed. He absolutely trounced me. He just set up way faster than I could, and he absolutely wiped the floor with me. Game 2 and 3 largely went the same. Now, you may have noticed in my list, I'm not running copies of BT9 MetalGarurumon, the one that pops 3 cost or lower tamers. And yes, MetalGarurumon can pop Cool Boy. It can pop, Taiki in the Crossheart matchup. I personally didn't consider those particular synergies worth playing it. If I'm going to play more removal, I'd rather play more copies of Metal Mamimon and hit more Digimon. I have found that removing those particular tamers very rarely tends to be like the game-winning play. Those are kind of little incremental advantage tamers, and yes, while you can wipe a couple of tamers off in the Crossheart matchup, good Crossheart players are going to be spreading their materials across multiple tamers. You're not going to be able to get a super clean hit anyways, unless, they're just putting all their things into one stack, which they shouldn't be. You can, sequentially each turn start, hammering one after the other, but most Crossheart decks are going to be able to set up and add more cards to their hand just as quickly as you can get rid of the tamers. So my suggestion is don't worry about BT9 MetalGarurumon right now. I think that slot's actually better used on other things, other cyborgs. But in the Crossheart matchup, again, you really want to try to set up bodies super early. So setting up Machinedramon, that is one of the matchups that I do play my single copy of Machinedramon for, and it did come up to help stage off a lot of that early aggression and makes them think a little bit more about their blitz plays. Having Machinedramon and Analog Man alone can help stage off plays like their Cross 8s and their Cross 3s. Cross 3 is honestly not super scary for this list. It's very easy for Machinedramon to wipe the card out, and any deck that is able to spam a lot of very heavy de-Digivolve triggers like Chaosdramon and BT8 MetalGarurumon has an inherently good matchup against Crossheart anyways. So this is a deck that honestly I think is a pretty solid matchup for Machinedramon. I don't have too much more to say. It's one of those things where you kind of learn the play routes and things like that. But once you get good at the matchup, Crossheart's actually one of the better matchups that Machinedramon has, as long as you know why those matchups are in your favor. If you lean into your strengths and kind of play them and make sure your opponent has to kind of play outs if they have them, it's actually pretty easy. I don't want to say easy, like again, phenomenal Crossheart players, and the guy that I played did excellently, but Machinedramon is a very tough matchup for that deck in particular because big bodies are hard for a Crossheart to deal with. Next up is 2 rounds against Security Control. Guys, I'm just going to be outright and blunt. I've always been very vocal. I want everyone in my community to feel like they can play whatever they want, and you can play whatever you want. However, for those of you out there who are playing Security Control, and you know who you are, and you are building a Security Control list with no pronounced win condition, I'm just going to say it, you need to expect that opponents are going to get a little annoyed when they have to be literally trapped in a game with you for 30 minutes just for a single game. One of the games that I played, because we ultimately played 4, both of my opponents two owed me. I pretty much scooped once I realized or got to the point where I decided the board state was just not worth playing through anymore, mostly because they would stack Tamer that removed my ability to play anything. They would play, bodies on board. They'd have 7 security, 9 security. There's a certain point where the game is just not worth it, honestly, time investment wise, headache wise, and at a certain point you have to realize it's not really winnable. And in the case of Security Control, that does tend to happen, especially if you're playing Machinedramon, stack building Machinedramon in particular. Now the Blitz option does help. All of the games against Security Control, I did my best to try to set up Machinedramons that were able to blitz in with multiple security checks, and that can help. Here's the problem. If you're blitzing in a Machinedramon, and there were multiple times where I blitzed in with 3 checks, and first check, Holy Wave, recover. Second check, Flame Hell Scythe, bring Machinedramon back, recover. Third check, Chaos Degrade, boom, your stack is gone. That happens a lot. It's one of those things where the matchup can feel very unwinnable. One of the other reasons that the things that really frustrate me about Security Control as a deck in general, and I apologize for being on my soapbox, but I did face it twice. I lost both games, and I want to explain why this matchup frustrates me so much. It's not even the fact that I lose, it's the fact that I can't win. Like, I'm okay losing games as long as my opponents are beating me. I don't feel like my opponent's beating me when I'm playing Security Control. There is some decision-making involved, but generally speaking, the way a Security Control matchup goes, if their security is good, they win. If their security is not good, they lose. And that's pretty much it. And that feels very sacky to me. It feels like there's not a lot of value or a lot of impact that the decision either player is making on the game has. If I'm deciding to build in Raising, and I swing into Security, and they hit Chaos Degrade for the 3rd time, well, I had no control over that. They just had Chaos Degrade in Security. If they're just slapping Machinedramon down, recover. Slap Machinedramon, recover. Flame Hell Scythe, Machinedramon, recover. Holy Wave, recover. Like, recover. You're making the decision to recover, but you have no control over what's going into security. That's not a choice you're making. You're just making it harder for me to win. Your whole game plan is just stall until I either can't win because I deck out, or I get so frustrated that I'm in a position where I can't play that I just give up and scoop. I am personally of the mindset that that's not a fun way in any capacity to play the game. Now, again, everyone's different. Again, you can play whatever you want, but when you are specifically playing a deck where your primary win condition is forcing your opponent to do nothing until they leave or deck out, that's toxic. I don't know how else to describe it here, guys. Like, if you're playing a deck with no win condition, that's a problem to me. The problem is, in these matchups, you basically have 2 choices. You can bang your head into the brick wall for 30 minutes and just check a bunch, recover, check a bunch, recover, check a bunch, recover, and just go through that painful cycle over and over and over again, or you can give up and leave. And those are really your only options. You either sit in the jail cell and let yourself be abused, or you just say, this isn't worth it, and you pick up. Now, both of all the situations where I picked my cards up were not situations where, like, they had actually, like, beaten me. I literally just got to the point where they created a board state where it just wasn't worth trying to play through it. I figured at this point I can't do anything. I just picked up. One of the situations that being mentioned here, they had 7 Tamers in play. They had, no, 8 Tamers. They had 4 copies of the 2-drop Purple Mimi, 3 copies of the Security Trash Kari, and 1 Memory Setter Kari. By this point, I can do 1 attack per turn because he's just going to gain 3 memory anytime I swing at security. I can't play options because he's just going to gain 4 memory whenever I do anything that way. He is going to be able to choke me every turn because anytime he plays an option, which is just removal every single turn, you just wipe the board. That's really all the deck does is removal, recover, removal, recover. So I can't do anything there, and he's going to keep choking me. And then I can't choke him because he has a memory setter. At that point in the game really does just feel unwinnable, and I just picked up. I said, okay, you've got it. I don't want to sit here and just do nothing for the next 40 minutes until I slowly draw my deck out. So we called it a day, and I picked up and left. Security Control is still an incredibly frustrating deck. I personally am of the mindset that Machinedramon from BT1 really needs to get hit on the ban list. Not just because the deck isn't topping, that doesn't mean the card doesn't need to get hit. And I get it. I'm on a soapbox. This is me ranting, and I fully recognize and understand that I don't like Security Control for reasons I feel like I've been very good about expressing. But just because Security Control is not a tier 1, tier 0, whatever deck, it doesn't mean that it's not a toxic deck that creates very unfun play patterns that are extremely abusable strictly by the existence of Machinedramon. Now, people will discuss things like, well, what about Flame Hell Scythe? What about this, that, and the other? Hitting Machinedramon solves a big part of the deck's problems because being able to loop recovery that doesn't have a limit, so you can go above 5, really to however high the heck you want, that to me is the biggest issue. If you can hit Machinedramon to 1 so that's less loopable and less abusable, I really think that kind of strategy of just stall until your opponent decks out can't exist anymore. If you think I'm just being toxic about this, again, you're welcome to your opinion. Maybe I am being a little toxic about this. I'm open to admitting that. However, I will say that using other examples for reference here, let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! For my Yu-Gi-Oh! Players out there, Security Control is basically equivalent of Mystic Mind Burn. But at least in Mystic Mind Burn, they have a win condition. Most of them are going to play copies of Cauldron of the Old Man to at least end the game at some point. But ultimately, it's the same thing, where they're not beating you, they're just removing your ability to win, and that's not fun. No one wants to feel literally trapped in a game with no way out except for picking their cards up. It's miserable, it's not fun, it is toxic, and I don't like that. I don't like doing that. When I play a game of Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic, whatever the case is, I want to be playing the game with you. We both decided to sit down as players and enjoy this experience together. I'm trying to do that, and you're telling me you don't want to do that. Your goal is not to play, it's just to make sure that I can't win and you can't lose. You're not pushing for a win. You're not pushing to end the game. You're not trying to bring us closer to a conclusion. You are trying to stall the end of the game as long as you possibly can, and I don't like that. Anyways, that's it. That's my soapbox. I honestly don't really have much to say as far as encouragement for the matchup because, again, it's luck-based. Like, if they have the security, they have the security. If they don't have the security, you're probably going to win. Like, it's really frustrating. It's why I don't like Security Control, of the many reasons that I've already mentioned. But anyways, I'm done. Security Control, 2 rounds, both losses. Nothing else to say. All right. Next up, I do have 1 round against BloomHydra. Now, BloomHydra is, again, a very difficult deck for Machinedramon specifically to get through because, first of all, they have Tuck effects, which get through Machinedramon's protection, so inherently that's very difficult to play around. And they have a lot of Suspend effects, which are also innately very powerful against Machinedramon, even Chaosdramon, because you're losing your ability to block. Now, against Grandis specifically, in terms of green, Analog Man is very helpful in those decks against those decks because you can redirect the attack anyways. You don't have to officially block. You can still prevent them from OTKing you if you have an Analog Man in play and you set up properly. BloomHydra is a little bit different. BloomHydra, you really need to be properly controlling the board in order to actually keep that deck down, and that can be very difficult to do. If BloomHydra gets good hits, they're going to build board states that are very wide, very scary, and surprisingly tall, very, very fast. Like, it is incredible how quickly they can go. In fact, in game 2 that I played against BloomHydra, on turn 2, he had a Hydramon in play and 2 Bloom Lordmons, all pushing aggression. On turn 2. That is how fast this deck can be if you open well. Granted, he had opened his copy of, Hidden Potential Discovered in this particular instance, but even still, that is wild that you can set up 3 megas on turn 2 just by opening with the right cards. So BloomHydra is a very tough nut to crack. Now, BloomHydra is also one of the reasons I really wish I had brought more copies of Metal Mamemon in my particular list. just because MetalGarurumon is one of the best ways to kind of control that matchup. Being able to keep spot removing extra bodies while also attacking, it's vital. You have to 2-for-1 them every turn, or they're just going to overrun you, and that is ultimately what happened. I don't think I even saw MetalGarurumon either of the games I played against Bloomlord, and to be fair, Game 2, I bricked hard. Like, Game 2, I opened with a bunch of Cyborgs, an Analog Man, and a Chaosdramon, and I think a Blitz option card. So I really didn't have a lot of setup. Ultimately, what I wound up doing is, of course, just dropping the Analog Man to get some extra digging, extra memory. I ultimately drew into 2 more Cyborgs, and then another copy of Machinedramon before he just destroyed me with the 2 Bloomlords. So that matchup was just very unfortunate. I did brick pretty badly in that particular game, but yeah, as a whole, the BloomHydra matchup does take some very specific build and some very specific play patterns to actually kind of keep the deck down, but really you can't keep the deck down. Really, that at the end of the day, that's the takeaway, is playing against that matchup is going to be very tricky because they can handle what you're doing very well. So play, again, learn the play patterns. That's another one of those decks that you want to make sure you're hiding and raising as long as you can and try to set up before you push out. Like, you want to be able to respond to their first mega and also deal with, like, the other level 5 they probably have in play after playing their first mega. Like, you have to push the whole board back, or they're just going to set back up completely again on the next turn. So you have to be very careful. You have to be very cautious, and you do need to make sure you get the correct inheritables so you can actually handle their board state all at once before they set back up again. And lastly, my final match of the day was against MetalGarurumon X, a good friend of mine from my locals. He is a phenomenal, and I do mean phenomenal, MetalGarurumon player. Every time I play him, whether it's on stream, at our locals, or just hanging out, I love it. He and I have some phenomenal back and forth. Some games he takes and some games I take. It's really great. I love the dichotomy. I love the challenge. He and I have a very good kind of back and forth match. So I've always enjoyed my play experiences with him. Now, what we ended up doing was we ended up going to Game 3, and all 3 of the games were fantastic. This was round 9, so this was the end of the day, and boy, I gotta tell you, there's something very refreshing. After playing a bunch of strangers, several who can get very hostile, it really does feel nice to be able to just sit down and play against a buddy that you know from your locals, even at the national level. We both agreed it was a very welcomed palate cleanser at the end of a very long and exhausting day. So thank you so much, James, for, I'll give you a little shout out. Thank you so much for being my final round matchup. Really did enjoy playing those games. Ultimately, the way those matchups went, I believe he took game 1, I think I took game 2, and he wound up taking a very close game 3. All three of the matches were pretty solid. Neither of us like super bricked during any of the 3, if I remember correctly. And honestly, it's one of those matchups where I can't honestly give you a super clean advice from my Machinedramon brethren out there as far as how to play that matchup. MetalGarurumon is a weird egg. Like, the way you play against MetalGarurumon strongly depends on how your opponent is playing the deck as well. Here's the thing. So unlike BlackWargreymon X, they can play the same game where they can hide in raising and wait until they can go for a big burst turn. So in some situations, you need to be the person to push up first so you can prevent them from doing that. In other cases, if you do push up first, they also play cards that can punish you for it. So it's very much a game-by-game judgment where you have to kind of gauge what your opponent's doing as the games progress and kind of figure out which plays to make one turn after the other, because your game plan has to change on a dime when you're playing against Melga. So it's a very, very skill-intensive matchup. Honestly, both MetalGarurumon and BlackWargreymon X are both very skill-intensive, and those are probably my favorite matches to play with Machinedramon. And yes, I did say that. I like playing the BlackWargreymon matchup. Now that I've kind of learned how to play it a little bit better, it is one of my favorite matchups because it's very skill-intensive, and there's a lot of very important decision-making to be made. So a better pilot is going to come out on top, and now, of course, RNG is going to play a part of that, but the pilot plays a big role in who comes out on top in both of these matchups. So I would say that if you really want to get better at the Melga matchup, you really have to kind of just play against a good MetalGarurumon player and figure out when to do different things. That goes for both of you. They have to learn to play around you too, because your deck is going to be able to do things that their deck is going to have a hard time getting through. Again, D-Digivolve 3 for a lot of decks is a death sentence. Now, they still have battle protection, but if they've swung in with their level 5 promo Garurumon, there's a good chance they at least lost some of that protection. And most of that protection, of course, is going to come from the lower end, the rookie or the champion slot. So depending on how well they built the stack or how effectively they were able to build the stack, they may or may not have a bunch of protections left over after triple D-Digivolving. So if just doing that may remove their battle protection, and you can potentially wipe the stack. This is what I'm saying, where it really depends on how the game progresses. So you may be able to wipe the stack that way. On the other side of the coin, you may not. But if you can at least get them low enough, then potentially triggers like MetalGarurumon can help you handle it. But MetalGarurumon X is also one of the big reasons that I'm playing a lot of the security effects that I am. 3 copies of Attack of the Heavy Mobile will pretty much put the kibosh on anything a anything a MetalGarurumon deck is doing. Being able to wipe their stack and have them not be able to use protection, of course, is bad news for them. And Chikurimon is also incredibly effective in this matchup. Now, certain situations, obviously Chikuri is going to be potentially a risk. If they have a BlackWargreymon promo in play, swing for a check, unsuspend, go into BlackWargreymon X, swing, check a Chikurimon, and devolve back into promo BlackWargreymon. That could potentially be problematic, of course, because now you've given them another free unsuspend. So you do have to be careful. Well, you don't. It's really a matter of kind of luck of the draw again. Where they hit Chikuri can be very good for you, but there's also potential that it could be very bad for you depending on very niche situations. But all in all, as I mentioned, MetalGarurumon is a very niche, not very niche. It's a very skill-intensive matchup. I love playing it. And when you get good at it, you do get good at it. Like I said, there's a lot of decision-making involved, and you as the pilot have the ability to kind of swing some of those games in your favor as long as you know how to properly set up and properly adapt as the game progresses. And yeah, that's going to about do it, guys. Thank you so much for sticking around. I hope all of this insight from my Nationals experience is helpful for you guys. I recognize, yeah, I ultimately, at the end of the day, I didn't do super well at Nationals, but I am still just so incredibly honored to have been able to play in the presence of so many incredibly skilled other players. And I'm coming back next time, mark my words. I will get another invite, and I will absolutely be bringing Machinedramon back to Nationals next year. So look forward to that. And I made an announcement on the channel, but I also just wanted to say verbally, to those of you guys who recognized me at Nationals and you wanted to come up and say hello, I really do hope you guys know how much that meant to me. It was so heartwarming that you guys cared enough and thought I was interesting enough to come up and say hello. It was so heartwarming. It was so humbling. I loved getting to meet each and every one of you guys. I got to play with a few of you guys. I'm so glad to have had that experience. For those of you who asked me for matches that I unfortunately didn't have the time or simply wasn't able to play, I truly am sorry. Please, by all means, I will be putting the link to my Discord in this video. If you guys encounter with me in Nats, or if you just want to interact and play some games over webcam sometime, please, I encourage every single person out there to hit me up. I'm more than happy to play with you guys. I love interacting with y'all. You're an awesome community. Please don't change. And I really couldn't ask for a better group to be behind me on Facebook. So seriously, from the bottom of my heart, guys, it was great to meet you, and thank you. But yeah, with that, that's going to about do it for this video. Thank you all for joining me. I am an avid herpetologist. Hope you guys have all enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe. And yeah, I guess I'll see you all next time. Hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Peace out.